communications, it's communicators, because we're talking about all of us and how to be effective workplace communicators. Our facilitator this afternoon is a member of the NMA Board of Directors. She's also chairman of NMA's Professional Development Committee. And she stepped up to the plate and said she would be happy to do this month's webinar. So we thank Renee for that. Let me give you a little more of her background. She's been employed at the Savannah River Nuclear Site for 25 years with increasing responsibilities in program and communication project management. Her corporate and educational research publications cover such cross-functional areas as communication, leadership, and project management with an emphasis in strategic planning. And if you know Renee, that all makes perfect sense. She holds an earned PhD in organizational communication and successfully completed Columbia University's Executive Leadership Development Program. Dr. Stewart is employed by Savannah River Nuclear Solutions, and she lives in Aiken, South Carolina. So without further ado, just a couple of rules. Number one, this is being recorded. Number two, we will keep everybody on mute, but Renee would like to make this as interactive as possible. So we would encourage you to unmute yourselves at any point to answer a question, to provide a suggestion. These things are a lot more fun when we get your 2 cents as well as ours. So Renee, I'm going to turn this over to you and mute myself.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Have you ever considered what would be the commonality between successful people and successful organizations? That commonality is effective communications. And today we need a tool belt. There are so many options out there. We need a tool belt that would say, okay, for a particular situation, a particular organization, we might use this set of tools. And take a hammer or a screwdriver as an example on a project. It may be effective in one area, same situation if you're using a communication tool set. It may be your email followed by, say, a telephone conversation. And so today we want to look at a couple of things. It's more important to look at your strategy, how to craft that message, and how to best fit that message into a delivery mechanism. And once you have that in your as part of your toolkit, then you're able to apply those tools as the situation arises. So that's what we hope to do today. What we do not want to do is to fall into this myth that says you have to have a technological background or that you need to be savvy with the terms. It's great to have those terms and a broad knowledge. But what you want to be able to do is to make sure your team or your group has that skill set within it and learn as you move along the line of continuous improvement. That's really what positions us to be able to be effective communicators. And so that's what we want to talk about today. Before we begin, I thought it would be almost foundational that we would have to have a business communication definition to frame this discussion. And without getting too technical, I went to a couple of sources that were broad in nature. They included the international audience, international participants. The documentation goes to that audience as well. And so the first one came out of the Management Study Guide. And it took a look at business communication as shared between at least two people or more, and goal-oriented in nature, meaning there has to be a result. There has to be a buy-in from the group or from the team or the two people to achieve success. And then the other one I took from Professor Kool. She's from the Indian Institute of Management, and she has done quite a bit of research in this area. And it was interesting that she had similar concepts within her definition, but she added that it's with that shared component, it was exchange between two, and also the progression of those ideas. So between the two, it came down to one thing. It's a shared, it's between the receiver and the sender, and it's also goal-oriented, meaning to achieve an objective. Now, I tried to find a cartoon that might help to move us down this definition path. It seems fairly simplistic, but when we have a message, we're trying to influence a person or a group of people, and we're trying to influence them in such a way that they join our project or our program. And to just express your end goal, they may see that as a huge gap, and it is, because it may be too cumbersome, it may be too hard. They may just not understand how to move from point A to point B. So what we want to do is we want to complete that message with not only our goal, but also in looking at the receiver, what is their goal? So we want to tell them how. Stating the goal alone will not get us there. We have got to think beyond ourselves and consider what questions ahead of time that they may ask. And in doing so, what we're trying to find is the relevant message. We're trying to find, okay, what can I provide in a communication to my receiver that's going to engage them, that's going to help them to not only see the end goal, but to have value for that end goal. Now, a needs assessment can be very lengthy. If you do it in some contexts, such as safety or security, it's quite long. And communication needs assessments can be the same way. But there is a short path that will achieve much success, and that's what I'm offering to you today. We have to find out what is the central communication goal of a message, for example. And we thought we'd use the monthly report. Everyone does a monthly or a weekly report, and thought that that would be common ground that we could consider in this needs assessment. Now, at this point, what we need to be able to do is to open up the dialogue among ourselves, because the answers will not be necessarily cookie cutter. We'll have various answers depending on our backgrounds. So I would like to open it up. Please feel free to unmute as you would feel comfortable in sharing. We're on slide 6, and we're talking about what is the central communication goal of the message of a monthly report, for example. Can anyone offer an idea of what it might be? When you receive your monthly report or your weekly report, what is typically the goal? In the last session, we had offered accomplishment, and that was actually the answer. Many times you do have monthly reports that summarize your accomplishments. Any other offerings?
Hi, this is Yvette. Yes, that's for our annual goals. We want to see what the accomplishment, but for me, if I have a department, I usually want them to give me reports on things that I have to do that meets the company goals, so that we could all be on the same objective.
Absolutely. Those company goals are very important because they show how we as employees actually support, if we're in a group, for example, supporting the company, what we do on a monthly basis to support that overall annual objective. And that really leads us right into our supporting goals, is that it's not only that overarching goal, but it's also the supporting goals that tell us, if we have a huge project, It's like, taking bite-sized pieces out of an elephant. You're just moving towards that goal. Any others?
Renee, this is Steve Bailey. I had a thought in the morning session. I didn't share it, but I will now. As I look at this, I remember when you were talking about doing the webinar, that this monthly report business that so many people have to do, and monthly reports can take many, there can be many varieties of those, and they can take different shapes. But I think one of the challenges of a monthly report is when people begin to feel that they're routine, that they don't matter, that nobody's reading them, that it's just a chore. Do you want to speak to that?
Absolutely. Later on in the discussion, you'll find where monthly reports tend to have a lagging type information. It's after the fact. Sometimes monthly reports share information that's so generic you can't picture yourself in them, in the statements or in the summary statement. And so, the best thing to do, for example, is to consider that you do have at least two levels, if not more. Organizations tend to be multi-level, so you're going to have this overarching statement or goal, and information that says, okay, we have a goal this year of producing X number of widgets, and we're right on schedule. But me as an individual, I can kind of see that, but if I can't see my work in that overarching goal, then I have to ask myself, well, what do I do to support it? So two levels, one's a summary level, but one is also what we call individual level, in that you can see some of the supporting kinds of work that was done to achieve the overall objective. And if both of those are not in those reports, you're disengaged almost from the beginning. And you have to ask yourself, well, what about, length? You don't want to get too long. And that's where being crisp and getting directly to the point is very important.
And Renee, I'm following the chat inputs. I wasn't for a second. I was looking at the wrong screen. And in answer to your original question about the central communication goal and are there supporting goals, the first person wrote to provide status, to identify threats, weaknesses, and opportunities and strengths. And another person wrote status of project timelines, positive or negative variances needed for annual forecasts, budget related.
Absolutely. With your, every project has to stay on a timeline that is tied to a budget or bottom line dollars. So to be able to take a look at your progress and say, okay, we're 25% there, we're 50% there. Well, what is the remainder of our budget, and in what buckets? Typically, it's not all spent towards the end. Sometimes that's the case, but not typically. There are certain parts within the overall project that expenditures can happen. So along those lines, you have to have the communication that says, okay, we're 20% there, and we're right on schedule with our budget and our project. So having that alignment is very important for certain audiences, and to be able to see yourself once again as the person working within a large organization, how I directly impact that bottom line is very important. Okay, you may have to help me, Steve, with those chats, because my screen, in last session I was able to see faces and chat, but in this one I'm not. So
I will be the vice president of chats.
Thank you very much, because we definitely don't want to lose anything here.
No, somebody already had to go, our chat items not getting through, and I went, sorry, they are now, so we're on it.
Thank you so much. Okay. Once again, I think we left off with do all goals map to an audience benefit, and that is where we were talking about the overall goal, the supporting goals, And then those two together actually result in an audience benefit that you're making progress towards the annual goal. Now, within that, you have to ask yourself this question: does the message answer the 5W questions? It's okay to talk about the goal in general. It's okay to share longer term goals and shorter term goals. But if we don't break that down and also talk about why we're doing what we're doing, you know, where are most of the work activities taking place? It could be location, for example, within country, if it's a large organization. If it's a small local government, it may be within departments. So knowing what your different departments are doing, it gives you that comprehensive knowledge over time. And so that is a benefit of the monthly report that should come out in order for it to be effective. And the next question is, when are the best times for the audience to receive the message? Any thoughts on that? Okay. Typically, there is not a definite time or location, if you would, that's best. You have to take a look at your audience and just determine, based on their needs, what the best times would be. One of the things that we do want to do is, within our email, to be able to highlight, whether it's in bold, use color, be able to highlight the fact that it's been placed in these locations, wherever those delivery points are, the fact that it's available at their leisure. Some like to read on the weekend, as we talked about in the first session. Some like to read during the week, during the day, and some in the evening. So bottom line is to be able to make it available to the maximum number of people within your target audience at the most available time that our most preferred time for them. And so you basically have to look at a 24/7 option. And today, with electronics the way they are, that's a viable option.
And Renee, someone chatted in from the West Coast, said the time before it's too late.
That's right. There's nothing worse than receiving information that is so old that it may not benefit someone in a reasonable time frame. And the last question is, what are the best methods for this audience to respond to the message? Any thoughts there? Typically, a monthly report is to status a performance, but occasionally there will also be a need for action. And the terminology here would be important. If you know the audience, if the audience is less technical in their terms, such as, you know, you're having a daily dialogue with them, it may be a project term, for example, action, take action. And so in the headline of the email, it might be action : and you express the need for feedback or for response. In other cases where you're not familiar with the audience and the technical terms are not used, reply, requested reply, or request are generally the terms used there. But again, using the subject head in an email, also being able to use that email in such a way that it would not get lost. I don't know about you, but my inbox stays full most of the time, and in trying to help it have some type of highlighter to it so that people would not miss it. That's usually the goal. Okay, any questions or further comment about this slide?
We did get a chat comment that says know your audience, know your email, know your meeting, etc.
Absolutely. Excellent point. Okay, slide 7. Now, the best of organizations have a gap, a communication gap, particularly on the front end of their communication. So you have to almost picture your communication with a gap already built in, and you've got to ask yourself a few questions. Now, research tells us that these are some of the kinds of things that you will face. Information overload. As stated earlier, my email and your email box is typically full. So how do we position the communication such in the alignment they receive maximum attention? Schedule pressures. If you're moving all day at a fast pace, you're using your text on phone to get quick answers. Position your message such that if it can be a quick answer, by all means, that's the best way typically to get some folks. But if it's a longer message, being able to simplify it or try to simplify it such that schedule pressures will not prevent them from responding to you. Multiple complex problems. If I'm dealing with, for example, assessments, I'm dealing with moving widgets out the door, I've got 3 or 4 balls in the air, I've got a set of communications that's got to come in for these projects and for other projects. The question then becomes, how do I take multiple complex situations and simplify that information in such a way that it will not make the receiver feel like, oh no, you know, another drudgery to move through this email or to move through this this conversation. I've got to really capsulize my information so that it comes across as brief as possible but gets directly to the point. Unclear expectations is another challenge. If you move someone through an entire communication and they really didn't get the bottom line, particularly in that first paragraph, usually that's a first short paragraph, they will become bogged down, and by the time they get to the end of it, if they get to the end of it, they typically have lost energy, if you would, for the message. And you don't want to deflate that energy. You'd like for it to be upfront, clear, short, and so to be able to do that is to set that expectation very early in the communication. Another gap would be the loud voices. Many times you're competing, not in a bad way, but you're competing for attention such that you've got to find a way to at least come up to the level of the loud voices within the organization such that all solutions are heard. And particularly in this environment, to overlook an affordable and very effective solution impacts the bottom line. And so the few loud voices, that's fine, but also try to uncover the softer voices within your organization. People have a tendency too to be, they're geared towards selective learning, things that they enjoy. If you enjoy or are passionate about reading, you'll read a lot, and that's great for getting messages to that audience. But there are also folks who are more pictorial, who want shorter statements, and so we have to balance the two as we move through our communications and trying to make them more effective. Okay, I've given you some of what the literature says, and I know that there are some specific ones that maybe you have that are more tailored to your organization. Any thoughts there?
I'm going to ask everybody to just give some thought to what are some challenges that maybe you've run into in the last couple of weeks in your organization when it comes to communicating. I know one is often people who are a little passive aggressive or who shut down, and that can be a challenge to communicate because you're not getting any feedback.
And feedback, it has a natural tendency to give us energy. We feed off of each other. And particularly, you could take this session, for example, just being able to dialogue brings some energy to the whole discussion and makes it more effective.
Who else wants to chime in? It's a good thing I'm not given demerits.
Okay. Let me share with you a guy by the name of Tom Codd, He's with Price Waterhouse Coopers, and he talks specifically about two very fundamental tools that you have to have in your toolkit. And he's not the only one. He just happens to be really out there in terms of being able to work across both business and university environments. And the research shows, not just with him and his team, but others, that listening and inquiry are probably the most fundamental tools that you could employ to get your messages crafted in such a way that they are delivered. They're delivered not only with the tool, but they're delivered mentally such that people understand it and they're motivated and willing to give feedback. So listening and inquiry are two, and we'll touch those. And then I'm going to share with you up underneath those, there are some other tools, they're sub-tools that help listening and inquiry to be more effective. And then we'll pick up with the remaining tools after that.
Renee, before you leave the slide,
yes,
we got two in via chat that I'll share with you.
Okay.
Challenges. I was talking instead of looking at chat. The first one says, lack of communication from leadership to all staff. And then in the individual word, sorry, I couldn't type fast enough. But once again, the first one is lack of communication from leadership to all staff. I'll let you talk to that, and then I'll give you the second one.
Yes, so many times, and this is where a leader has potential to be very effective and very successful. But because they are so bombarded during the day with requirements coming from more senior management, peer-to-peer requirements, and also trying to deal with the projects that are assigned up underneath them, they will find themselves, if they're not careful, in a vacuum. And that vacuum, it really tries to prohibit the communications from happening. And it's a gap. It can be a gap. And you have to overcome that. There has to be an effort that as information needs to go out, that if you can't deal with it yourself to your staff, that you at least have some folks around you who can help you do that. And that's okay. But having the communication is the important thing. It's also important, I'm not negating that leader. That leader has to have the face-to-face contact. Eventually, he or she also has to have the dialogue in multiple formats so that everybody is reached. But the bottom line is in order for that leader to be successful, and many people just stop right where they are in their career because they're not able to overcome that themselves, and will not find the folks to surround them to help them be better at that. So you're right. The bottom line is that communication will make you or break you. People, if they don't have information, there's a tendency to fill the gap. That gap typically can be filled with erroneous or misleading type information, which gets you in another quandary. So it's best, if you can, to take the time, even if it is short and to the point, and but just so it's fairly often, to keep people abreast of what's going on.
Okay, thanks, Renee. And the second one gets down into the weeds, and we had the same conversation this morning, so it's obviously important. Someone wrote, issues arise when people reply to a different question using the same subject line. And that was an irritant with Avis, I think it was, this morning, if you'll recall.
Yes. The trust level is what you're after. And if the subject line has one has a broader context, or if it's too narrow and you're not able to ping on exactly what the bottom line information is, it can impact whether or not I will trust that that next message that I get from that person is going to have the context in which it should have. And so it's very important to make sure that there's alignment.
And I know I find sometimes the discussion will go on for a while with the same subject line, which is fine, and then you get to either find a small piece of it or something tangential to it. That's when I change the subject line. Even though it's the same people, same general topic, at some point in time, somebody's probably going to be looking for that, okay, what was that response? And then they call it up, and there's 42 emails with the same subject line. And if you have then changed the subject line on something that's much more narrow, I just think it's helpful to everybody.
Absolutely. Okay. Moving right along. We have... when we listen and inquire, what happens is a picture starts developing in our mind. And once that picture starts developing, you will see, or you should see, an end result. It should give you enough of the detail within that picture that when you communicate it to someone else, it's simple. They can see the big picture. They don't have to have all of the questions answered at that point, but it needs to be simple and understood in everyday language and communicated that way. And Albert Einstein did has an excellent quote regarding the simplicity of our communication. Not only do we need to see the picture, but the person receiving the information needs to see it. It can be all jumbled if we're not careful. We have to lay it out very clearly so that they can not only see the picture, understand the main concepts, but then taking it a step further, they need to actually be in the picture. They need to see themselves having an active role in your communication. And then this piece is, it was important for me. I learned quite a bit as I was trying to develop this portion of not only this presentation, but also a paper. And that's all around the concept of enrichment. If a communication does not simplify somebody's life, their work life, or have some kind of a benefit to it, then it just does not have that extra hook. Yes, it may be of interest for a short while, but if you have an enrichment component to your communication, how do I make life simpler or better for someone? Then that's when you can take something very complex, like you see in the picture or the graphic, and make it such that, in this case, these are international, it's an international group or team, and being able to diagram it in such a way that they can see that their work is streamlined. They may be able to have more resources at the end of the quarter or the end of the project. And when you can start showing that kind of enrichment, you'll get a better attention line within the communication. Also within that communication, there needs to be some type of confidence communicated. A confidence that says, this is the goal and this is how we'll get there. Now, you may not have all the details available at that point in time, or the picture may be changing and you know it's changing. If that's the case, say this goal will be accomplished. These are the details we have on it today. However, this picture, may look different a month from now, but we will still achieve the goal, and be able to lay that out for the audience so that they can see that you have confidence in your project. John Maxwell said it better than most folks, and when it comes to the bottom line and commitment, he says, people may hear your words, but they feel your attitude. And I don't know if you have read these types of office memos, but some of them can come across real stellar or legalistic, and some can come across very genuine in how they deliver that message, and also leave you with the feeling that the person is being as candid as possible with the information that they have. There are some factors that help us to get our desired responses, and some of them are shared and some are different. Respect is one of those that is shared. Both manager audiences, as well as your peers, your coworkers, others inside and outside the organization, the respect has to come across, and respect can be respect for the timeliness of the information, the respect for the accuracy of the detail, respect for tone. Those are some examples. But then there are some differences too, and it depends on your audience. For example, in a manager's type audience, you may have more formal communication. Your goals are probably more organizational, higher level organizational goals, and your longer term benefit statement will be more toward the bottom line. Whereas your coworkers, peers, can be informal, tangible, meaning it's more personal or group related, and then shorter term benefits. They're not as tied to the longer term, say, annual bottom line, but they may be towards a quarter goal, for example. So knowing your audience in terms of the level, and this is called information leveling, when you're able to level that information and then target it towards that audience. Your delivery method, there are many today, but one of the things that we're trying to do in this presentation is not to be so tailored and giving you more of a strategy, and the tailoring of it actually comes within your organization as to how you prefer to communicate. Some folks are located or co-located next to each other, so face-to-face group meetings may be moving from a cubicle to a designated area within their work location. Whereas if you're spread out, and particularly over multiple geographic locations, that of course is not possible. But there are some things that we can take a look at to strategize to deliver our messages once they're crafted. And I'm going to talk to you about now channel richness. Channel richness can be low or it can be high. On the low end, which is the left side of your screen, the low end tends to, it has more nonverbal, it's more words related. The high end is more nonverbally related. On the low end, for example, it may be those reports, the monthly reports and the bulletins that we talked about, or memos. It's kind of very words or text-based, less emotion. on the high rich side, it's more nonverbal in nature, and it's the subtle cues are important. They want to be able to actually see the communication happening. And so in that case, I found it very interesting that face-to-face is still the most channel rich. You get high value out of it. Video conferencing, it was almost neck and neck. It came in just under face-to-face. And, you know, I questioned, as I was reading, I was questioning why that may be the case. And the only difference that we could tell is sometimes there are technological issues that are associated. But as technology progresses, we can see that being more pure over time. On the low side of the house, there are very much value in there's very much value in our reports and our recorded speeches, online discussions. But as you can see, as you move more towards the visual, you get higher return on your channel richness. I have a friend of mine that works in the medical community, and she was sharing with me, she took a look at this high context, low context schematic, and she said, Renee, she said most of the cultures are represented within our hospital. It's a teaching hospital. And she said it's interesting that I've often wondered why, and it's interesting that our communications are provided in so many different formats. And the more cultures you have represented, obviously the more you're going to be able to balance, or need to be able to balance, the difference between just the text and also pictures with words. And so that will give you an idea of the high context versus low context cultures, and how important it is to do at least a quick snapshot of your organization to find out, you know, how do you need to be communicating, and what are the best delivery methods. Okay, let's talk about, this moves us back to our tool set. And let's talk about for a minute what we think advocacy means within your organization. What do you think that means? The graphic kind of gives it away in terms of when you are in an organization, you're after solutions, and not all voices are heard. Remember, we said some are loud and some are soft. We have got to uncover the majority of voices in our organization in order to be able to move towards finding the right communication and solutions. And so if we express a concern, a position, or a solution that might not be spoken, we've got to find it. And so how do you think, or when do you think that would be important?
Renee, we have a chat where someone says promoting your organization.
Okay. Well, in promoting your organization, this would definitely be a way to do it, is to say that my voice is heard when it comes to identifying solutions and having your input. Engagement is very important. And so to be able to identify what those solutions would be and be able to share them. And why do you think that there would be people not interested in participating in advocacy or representing the opinions that are not voiced?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Hope someone will chat in, or at least speak in. You're saying, why would someone not want to be an advocate?
Right.
Yeah. I'm guessing one instance would be someone is, oh good, someone just bailed us out. They were,
Okay.
you don't share the same beliefs or don't see the organization as a whole.
That's great. Absolutely. Sometimes it's fear of reprisal. You know, you're not quite sure what that position would mean for the organization, and so you'll shy away from it for a while until you learn more. And so in order for advocacy to work, one of the things that we have to do is we have to really educate with details, factual details on the position. And then once we're able to do that, people will become more comfortable in supporting positions. But having that information out there so that people can advocate for it. And in communication, business communication space, it's very important to uncover the majority of opinions so that you can make better decisions. And this, go ahead.
This is Glenn Button from BLASC, and I know that if your project is competing for budget, you definitely want to be an advocate for that, but you may be strategic about the environment, where in one environment you might be an advocate for a particular topic, but it's just not appropriate for another environment.
Absolutely. I like that point of view, and thanks for sharing it, because you know, this is not a cookie cutter science, as we shared on the out front, you know, of the discussion, is that it's very important to be able to know your audience and know what works for them, know how they are interested in pursuing additional information from you and how to do that, how to engage them. And so you're right, being able to at least take a look at the opinions and being able to couch them in such a way that people can make a decision. And this adds to your value. It's a tool in your tool belt that, particularly when solutions seem thin, you can pull out this tool and actually increase the value of the communication of the organization just by uncovering the opinions. Okay, leadership. We are a leadership organization. We know that it means influence behavior, but it's influence, in this case, it's influencing behavior through effective communication. And so the question then is, when is it important? When is it important in your organization to use this tool? When we have the inability to create a picture, you know, leadership is creating that vision. So when we have the inability to create that picture and share it with others in such a way that they can see themselves in that picture, then leadership is very important. That tool is very important to use, because the communication will help to create the picture. It helps bring definition to it. It helps bring engagement to it. And what will get in the way of it is if we cannot share the information that helps to create that picture. And so it's very important to have that as part of your tool belt in order to be an effective communicator. Stephen Covey says, leadership is communicating to people their worth and potential so clearly that they come to see it in themselves. And that's what that leadership component is all about. Ken Blanchard adds to this. He says, the ability to communicate appropriately, and those are the channels, those are the methods, the levels that we talked about, is an essential component for effective leadership. Okay, conflict management. What do you think that is? I know generally what that is in definition, but when it has an impact on your communication, what would conflict management be? If you have more than 2 people in a room, you're going to have a difference of opinion.
Right. So you want to be able to be in a group and manage your group in a way that people don't get into conflict. You should see everybody feedback could be used in a positive way. So as a leader, you're trying to do conflict management in your big groups if it becomes an issue.
Right. You know, one of the first things within that communication, you bring up a very good point, is that it has the sender is sending the message, but unless the receiver is able to see themselves in the picture and say they totally cannot see themselves in the picture, it may be that the leader steps in and says, okay, you both tried to create what you see or communicate what you see. Let's find common ground and start with the common ground and rebuild the picture so that they both can see themselves in that picture. And communication is used to do that, whether it's verbal or written. Many times it starts out with a meeting and you don't necessarily get it all accomplished in that meeting, but once they go away and return during those that pause, if you would, that information was possibly handled or delivered using another method. And so in every method that you use within conflict management, it's all about building a picture that they both can see themselves in. And that adds value to your communication skills.
And we have in from Washington State, help everyone be heard. Don't allow bullying.
Absolutely. Bullying has really come to the forefront of the environments that we all work in, being cognizant of when it exists and how to eliminate it from your environment takes an effective communicator that can handle it through conflict management. Okay, on this one, it's a tool that not only I almost did not want to put it last, but it has to be last in order to be first, if that makes any sense. Being able to critique yourself sometimes is hard, and you need the green eyes to be able to help you do that. Sometimes I'll write a message, particularly if it's very complex. I'll write the message on day 1, say, and day 2 come back and review that message myself. I'll see some tweaks, but then that's when I take it and start passing it through a set of green eyes, and that would be the folks that you have come to trust or know that they know the environment that you're working in, and that they can give you some constructive feedback, and be willing to put enough time into your schedule to do that. And sometimes that's hard, particularly when we're all up against a tough project schedule. At times it's difficult, but it's worth the time if it does a few things. If it increases the value to the company, which if you're having to turn around messages 2, 3, 4 times and to get it right, for every time you're sending out that message and there's confusion as part of that process, it's time and money. And so it's really better to have on the front end a process that helps you get the message as close to being right as possible. What gets in the way of constructive feedback?
All right, survey says ego and lack of trust came in from the West Coast.
That's true. Ego, in a very simple sense of the word, there's a lot of psychology built around it, but if you just look at yourself and you say, and we're, we would be I think the term would be thin-skinned. If we have that approach, then automatically if we're not permeable, then we don't allow the freshness to come in to our work, and we don't allow the continuous improvement that can come into us. We have to be permeable, and too often we're not. And I would put myself, as well as anybody else, to put us in that category. There's always those times when we have a sensitivity, if you would, and to be able to look at that and say, look, I can improve, and the constructive feedback comes to help me do that. That's when we then become the effective communicator that we need to be. Anybody else?
It looks like, Glenn, are you on? Looks like maybe, I can't tell.
We're muted. Thanks, Steve.
Here at Harbor, we said the same thing, eagle and pride.
I'm sorry, I missed the other word.
Pride.
Right.
Pride.
Ah, okay. I was cutting off on the end. And that plays into it as well. We've got to have a sense about us of being a learner, and we are continuously trying to do that, continuously trying to learn. And if we're not able to do that in the organization, it really prohibits that transfer of knowledge, and knowledge has to be moved in order to develop. The knowledge has to move around, and the only way we can do it is through communication. And the communicator plays a critical role.
Renee, this is Steve. I can't let this one go without stressing, in my mind, the importance of tone. How we say something may not be how it's heard, and that can be all based because we don't understand the lessons of tone.
That's correct. If and you don't always know how you're coming across, and having folks around you that would be willing to be that sounding board and that you trust, is very important. And that's both from a written standpoint as well as a verbal standpoint. I know that emotions can get tied up in your emails, and it's really good to take a pause before you send. If you're very passionate about a decision that's been made, a proposed solution, and if you feel your feathers ruffling, if you would, the best thing to do is to write your response. That's okay to do that, but be sure to give yourself some time between the time that you write it and the time that you send it. You'll see a very different tone between the two messages. Okay. So to wrap this up, you're on your tool belt. Listening and inquiry are the basic tool set that you'll need, and it has been proven and borne out in many different fields of various communicators who were determined to be effective. Now, beyond that, there are some tools that will help us to add value to our organization that is not your run-of-the-mill communication. And we went over advocacy, the use of leadership when the picture cannot be seen, advocacy when the voices could not be heard, being able to resolve conflict. Conflict can be healthy in an organization, but you have to be able to resolve it. And communication is a tool to do that. And finally, being able to receive feedback from others, being able to understand and recognize that we all have a continuous improvement trajectory, and in order to move up that trajectory, we've got to be willing to take a close, critical look at our performance. And so with that, I believe that it will bear itself out that these are some tools that you can apply that will certainly improve and make you a better communicator. Do I have any final questions?
I don't see anything in the chat room. Anybody want to toss in something for Renee before we go? Going once, going twice. Oh, someone said thanks. Great workshop. So, Renee, I want to thank you and give you a chance to wrap up if you want. This is a broad topic, but yet it's an important topic. Those who know me know that I often say, the older I get, the more convinced I am that almost every problem at work, at church, at home, in your family has a communication root to it. And what we do in business is critical. We don't have much time. So becoming effective communicators and understanding what's in our tool belt is increasingly important, Renee, and you hit some really good subjects.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the time of this audience. And if hopefully everyone has a copy, and if you do not, just let us know. We'll have it available. And as Steve said, it should be recorded. And hopefully, if there are following topics that you would be interested in, particularly in the area of communications, it's so critical to you as an individual and to your organization to make you both successful. Please let us know, because we want to be able to be helpful in that area.
And Renee, one, of course, I always have to have the last word. Actually, I'm not. I'm sharing one that came in from somebody a little while ago. Sorry, Steve and Renee, have an emergency at our fire station, so I need to duck out. Thank you. This has been very helpful, and I will be sharing the presentation within the leadership at the firehouse as well as my fellow NMA board and chair members. Thank you in all caps. So it's a nice way to end.
Absolutely. Have a great weekend.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.